Welcome to the Stretch to Go podcast. My name is Ian Ray, your host. Today I have Dr. Turner Osler, based out in Vermont. He is a research epidemiologist, former trauma surgeon, emeritus professor at University of Vermont, and the CEO of QOR 360. Dr. Turner, welcome to the Stretch to Go podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
Yes, so most of my audience know I'm usually sitting at a chair or a couch or something. Today, most of you have seen me. I'm sitting on a different kind of chair. It's not any chair. It's the QOR 360 chair, namely the Aero 2.0. So first, before I even talk about the chair, Dr. Turner, how did you guys come up with the name QOR 360? Because QOR, I'm always intrigued about the name, the brand. So please explain to me how that came about.
Yeah, no, it's kind of embarrassing. My son and partner says it's the worst name anybody ever thought of, and it might be. But we wanted the idea of core because our chair engages the core muscles pretty much immediately and all day long. But all of the URLs that start with C were taken. So the only way we could get core was to use a Q, which, that just confuses everybody. But there is kind of an upside because Core 360 QOR 360, that's a Q followed by an O. And that never happens in the English language. So if you just type QO, pretty much the web finds us because it's a spelling error. We're basically a spelling error. As Core 360, the idea was to bring attention to the human core muscle and how the spine supports everything and allows people to turn 360 degrees while supported by their core. Kind of the opposite of being propped up by armrests, headrests, backrests, footrests, lumbar support, kind of typical ergonomic office chair.
Yeah, I do find myself in any type of those ergonomic chairs. I mean, you're really fixating yourself in that position for so long. I mean, it damages your body, right? I mean, you're fighting against gravity, you're fighting against having your glutes being asleep, hamstring. So like there's a cascade of things. And I used to work in sales jobs where I'm sitting at a desk. So obviously hunch forward, neck, low back, hip, those the common that most people probably will attest. Yes, a chair does, but they don't know that that's the cause of maybe a low back pain. But enough about what I do. You're the guy who went from trauma surgeon to sitting at a desk. And so tell us the story of how this came about with Core 360 and your journey, I guess.
Yeah, well, I didn't start out to be making furniture and selling chairs over the web. I did my undergraduate work in neurobiology at Princeton. I went to medical school at the Medical College of Virginia. I did a residency at Columbia and Harvard and surgery, and spent my career as an academic trauma surgeon. But I kind of aged out of the operating room, and so I started doing epidemiology, which is mostly writing computer code as it happens. And so I was sitting at a desk for the first time in my life for really long periods of time, and I started having back trouble, which, I thought, well, I went to medical school. How hard can this be? And I took a deep dive, and it turned out that Western medicine does not understand back pain. It's shocking, but Western medicine doesn't even care about back pain because nobody dies. Pretty much everybody gets over their back pain eventually, and there's really not much money to be made from the project. It's just been kind of the ugly stepchild, and the orthopedists will, kind of operate on a herniated disc, but that's a small percent of what back pain is. Most back pain really is very poorly understood. And as you suggest, it's not a structural defect with the spine, it's a defect in how we use our spines. Our spine is designed to be out hunting rabbits and running from jackals. It's not designed to be slumped over a computer keyboard all day long. And if you insist on using your spine like that, it will object.
Okay. So this was what year was this that you had the changing effect of, back pain and then you're like, you know what, I have to find out what the solution is. So what year was it that this whole journey kind of came to a pivot?
Right. So I basically bought every chair that was like supposed to be better. The Balin's kneeling chair, all of them. and each one was worse than the one before. I was shocked that, you know, people get PhDs in ergonomics, and they just haven't done a very good job. I've been to ergonomic conferences, I've presented at their meetings, and they're stuck in a model of how people sit that's left over from the 1950s. They think people should sit with their knees at 90 degrees, their ankles at 90 degrees, and their hips at 90 degrees. But it turns out the human anatomy doesn't allow that posture. And so the only way to kind of get that posture is to ram lumbar support into somebody's back. And now you've made an impossible ask of the spine. And the chair industry, the ergonomic furniture industry, has been selling this design for 70 years, and they have no interest in changing the design because I tell you they are making bank. I don't know if you've noticed, but ergonomic chairs are 500 or 600 or 1,000 or 2,000 bucks a pop. They have no interest in finding a better design. Zero. I know because I pitched them.
And what was their reaction? Were they scoffing at you?
It's interesting. I've had some interest from, I probably shouldn't be mentioning names, but some of the more
Well known.
forward-thinking ergonomic companies have I've been in conversation with, and it's a very interesting conversation. One guy I met was part of the team that designed the Herman Miller Aeron chair in 1998. They've sold 5 million of those chairs, and that's kind of the industry standard that is used in to compare new stuff to. And so I met this guy at an ergonomic conference, and we had a long conversation because he's a chair designer. That's his whole career. He spent his whole career doing that, and he's famous because he's famous. And I'm just like a nobody, emeritus professor from the University of Vermont with some weirdo idea for a chair. But he was a very interesting guy to talk to. And he talked about the kind of stuff that chair designers talk about. And I talked about anatomy and physiology and energy expenditure and so on. And so it was an interesting conversation because we were coming from two different worlds. And we swapped email addresses. And when I got back to Vermont, I got an email from him a couple of days later, and he said, "I feel terrible. I've spent my life trying to design chairs that are so comfortable no one wants to get up, and you're telling me that that is catastrophic for people's health and their posture." And then he said, "But what do you want me to do? We've convinced people that they can't sit without backrest and lumbar support, and I cannot sell a chair that doesn't have those features." So the whole ergonomic chair industry is like trapped in their legacy, and they can't break out. More than that, there's no impetus because they're making plenty of money.
How many billions? Is it millions or billion-dollar industry is the ergonomic chair?
Billions, billions.
Yeah, that's a big. You're fighting against giants for sure.
No, and here's one more story that
Uh huh.
that I think my lawyer won't like. So I gave a TED talk a while back, and
Yes,
it was well received. And then we got a call from the main TED thing, which is in California once a year. They only let in people with names like Bill Clinton, Hillary, people like that. It's 20 grand to get into their 2-day weekend thing, and so it's a big deal, and not the kind of thing I would go to. But they got in touch with us. They said we pass out bling to the clientele that comes to this, and we'd like to pass out one of your chairs to each of the attendees. Can you get together enough chairs for us? And I said, yeah, no, we could do that. Yeah, that'd be great. That would be terrific. And she said, okay, fine, we'll put it together. And then 2 days later, I got a call saying, never mind. Our lawyers tell us that Ted has a arrangement with Steelcase, and we aren't allowed to use any other kinds of chairs.
that's crazy.
No, no, it's a crazy story. You know, I don't think they're afraid of us, but
Hmm.
they would like for us to shut up, I think.
So I think it's like changing people's mindset or beliefs, especially if it's 70 years old. That's such a hard thing to do to change like the mass society to understand that sitting at a chair. I mean, like I know in one of your blog posts you talk about sitting a lot, and that's the new epidemic that's slowly creeping up. And I agree. Before I even started talking and finding about this, I already knew sitting was bad. I already knew sitting was horrible because we sit in the car, we sit at the table, we sit on the couch, we sit waiting down, waiting at doctors. So there's a lot of sitting, and I've noticed that myself. So I'm 30 years old. I can already see that it's bad for most people to sit all day. And like I know you pinpointed, I think it's on your website saying that going to the gym does not fix that. It's the lifestyle, right? It's I mean, yeah, you could work out 1 hour, 2 hours a day, do a lot of stretching, but that's like compounding, like 8 hours or however hours that you're fighting for 40 years. So I that's why it hit home to me when I found out about what Core 360, and it really aligned with what I want to bring is I'm trying to promote people about how, you know, with the barefoot shoes and fascia, like it's important to take care of bodies. It's so like this is what people would sit down on to make their money, right? And so I think it's really important to know that this could help, but help us to understand what makes this chair so different because there's a technology that you also have, correct? The red rocker. Yeah. So if you want to explain to us kind of what that red rocker is.
It's a little hard to show in 3D, but this is the shape, and there it is by you. It's a novel geometric shape that actually we discovered. Archimedes kind of sniffed around this shape, but he missed it. It's the volume of intersection of two cylinders at right angles with non-coincident axes and possibly different radii. So, think of the volume of intersection of two cylinders, and what that shape is this. And the thing that makes it interesting is if you put it on a surface, it'll rock, and if you put another surface on top of it, it'll rock. And because these two surfaces are 90 degrees apart, it tips in every direction. So it's absolutely the simplest possible way to get something that will tip in a balanced way in all directions, but is tough enough that, gym bros can kind of beat up on it without tearing it apart. It's a harder problem than you might think to make something that's delicately balanced and still tough. And, I've been in conversation with a lot of people over the years, and one engineer in Israel, well, one guy in Israel was trying to build an active chair. And, I sent him one of ours and he sent us a prototype. And when I talked to him, he said, I've got half a dozen engineers and it's all about springs and screws and cams. And yours is just a shape. And I said, well, if you hire engineers, they bring the baggage of cams and screws and levers and pulleys. But if you get a guy who comes from, kind of a biology surgery background, you get something that's kind of shaped like the human patella, because that's how biology works. It works by shape, really. And so you can kind of think of our chair as kind of a natural extension of human anatomy, that allows you to kind of move in the way your anatomy ordinarily would.
So would you say like so I know you're saying patella, like was that kind of coincide with like hips, like how hips are supposed to move, and not being stiff, or like I guess kind of help us to make a good analogy.
Well, by making the pelvis just a little bit unstable,
Hmm.
suddenly you're responsible for your posture. Nobody has ever fallen asleep on one of our chairs, because the core has to constantly be engaged where they'll be on the floor. And so it has this side effect that you don't have to spring for an espresso at 2 in the afternoon because our chair actually keeps people more energized and awake. We've heard this more than once from people. So it automatically engages people because well, if you have to stay engaged, and it's a kind of, it's not like doing burpees, but your
Hmm.
metabolic rate does go up by about 30%. We've measured this in our lab here at the University of Vermont, and other people have measured it for other tippy chairs, other labs, other chair designs. But the core idea is that, by making a chair tippy, people have to be using way more muscular activity to stay balanced and upright, and the number settles in around 30%. That's a substantial, that's adding 3,000 steps to your day kind of stuff, without getting up from your chair. And so, with your metabolic rate kind of cranked, a lot of things get better. Your good cholesterol goes up, your bad cholesterol goes down, your insulin goes down. But we know that if you can get people to get up and walk around every 30 minutes, their insulin profile looks a lot better. It's very hard to get people to get up from their desk and go for a walk every 30 minutes because they've got stuff to do.
Yeah.
Our chair kind of keeps people sort of walking all the time.
Yeah, especially with the wheels, knowing that you can move around, and of course, like I said, being able to do
Exactly.
a 360, that's even more. I think one thing I was looking into and how you got into Feldenkrais, because somewhere down there, and people don't know what Feldenkrais is. It's a method of natural movement. Is that correct? I'm still learning about it because I had a previous guest, Jay Kernke, so she's also a practitioner. But I was just intrigued that somewhere down the line, the Feldenkrais method came along your way. Is that correct? Or
It is, and in fact, it was the Feldenkrais method that introduced me to the idea of having an unstable surface kind of as a postural reset. A storied Feldenkrais trainer who is based in Montreal, about an hour and a half from where I am in Burlington. I'd been up to have sessions with him many, many times, and he put me on an unstable surface to sit on, and this is terrific. This is just great. But the version he had introduced me to, costs almost $2,000. And I thought, this is too good to have it locked up by rich people. I'm sure we can come up with a way to make active sitting available at a price that reasonable people can afford. And that was an act of hubris on my part. 'Cause I had a couple patents, but I never really designed anything, and I didn't know anything about furniture. I was a washed-up trauma surgeon doing epidemiology, for Christ's sake. But as I looked around, nobody else was doing this. Nobody was trying to make an affordable chair that would let people move while they're sitting. So, and I probably wouldn't have gotten very far, except Burlington has a terrific maker community called The Generator, where there
mhm.
are people who are just get so excited about the weirdest ideas. They have tools and they have enthusiasm and they have designers and and so, it took about a year, but ultimately we hit on this rocker as the core idea. And then, we just started making chairs and, we try them out on friends and family. And finally we started selling them over the web.
And that red rocker is, of course, in the logo as seen, which, I love logos. It makes sense on the chair. So genius idea. So let's kind of dive in. So I know you're going to be speaking at the Onyx Expo coming up in May, and I want to kind of get a sense of what are some of the things that you give us a preview of what you're going to be talking about, because along the way too, you talk about how barefoot shoes, or like you're talking about the hunter gatherer and how humans evolved and whatnot, and how I guess the foot is such an essential part of the movement. If the foot is weak, if the foot is not functioning, it goes up that chain. And so, talk to us like, what is it the preview, and how does the barefoot shoe kind of also come across your timeline with all this happening?
No, it's very interesting. We met up with the guy who invented the barefoot shoe online. He's a very engaging guy, Tim Brennan. And he reached out to us because of the idea of setting the foot free rather than putting it in a box and squeezing it for 12 or 18 hours a day was the genesis of the idea for barefoot shoes. And our chairs, set people free up the rest of the human body. It's the same core idea. The
Mhm.
barefoot shoe crowd wants to free the feet. We want to free everything else. It's the same project, really. And so, we had a very interesting conversation. And Tim revealed that he had wanted to make a chair, and he also had the idea about making shoes. And he thought it's going to be a lot easier to sell shoes. And so, he invented barefoot shoes and made a fortune. We chose poorly. We chose active sitting, which is a brand new idea. And so the market doesn't exist. You have to build the market. And so it takes time. So it's taken us a decade. We've sold about 20,000 chairs over the web now. So it's not like we don't have any footprint, but it's nowhere near what, Steelcase or Herman Miller is selling. But we went to the Barefoot Shoe Expo last year in Denver, and we were warmly embraced because people who are into barefoot shoes really get the idea of freer movement and not constraining the human body. And so we thought, oh boy, we'll go back this year. And I've been thinking about barefoot shoes and the human foot for, well, a long time, of course. But I had the idea that it's not really enough to put the foot in a barefoot shoe that lets it move. If you're then going to just walk on surfaces that are perfectly flat to, 1/10,000th of an inch and hard, because the
Mhm.
human as I'm sure you know that your human feet have 52 bones between them. They have a quarter of the bones in the human body, and then we and they're designed to walk on very elaborate and mobile surfaces. And then we feed them just the same signal, hard and flat, 24/7 for their entire. And your feet kind of first they get bored, and then they get cranky because they're trying to move inside of your shoe. And because they can't get traction and do anything, they spend more time flexed than extended. And before you know it, you've got contractures and you've got bunions and you've got
My toes.
you've got hammer toes, and then you've got bone coming through the skin, and now you're doing amputation. I've done this surgery. It's a nightmare, and it's an unnecessary nightmare because shoes are so distorting the human foot that they're causing real mischief. So, the idea of freeing the foot to me makes a huge amount of sense, but you want to feed it a more interesting signal. So, the thing we're working on now is trying to find some kind of surface we can put under people's standing desks so that they can kind of have the experience of being on the savannah while they're standing in their office. So, this is just out of a 3D printer.
Ooh.
The idea is that it's a tessellated surface of tiles, each of which is independently mounted on its own pedestal of flexible material. And so walking on this with your foot kind of gives you the feeling of what it would be like to be walking on the African savannah, 30 or 50,000 years ago. I'm psyched about this idea for people who are at standing desks because standing desks don't do them much good, but if you put something more interesting under their feet, it might. So that's coming out of our skunk works soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's great people are standing at the desk, but like I guess it would make sense also to have something for the feet to be awakened and to be moving as well, you know. So
Yeah, I think we're going to do this one on a Kickstarter. Keep your eye out.
I'll look forward to that one for sure. So let's talk about this Aerial 2.0 because this is the updated version, and I know you probably have some in the works. If someone was to ideally set up the desk, okay, in the right way, what are some of the key points that you guys also point on the website as far as monitor and shoulder and hips? Like, how are you supposed to set this up correctly?
The single most important thing is that you get your knees lower than your hips. If you try and sit with your knees at 90 degrees and your ankles at 90 degrees and your hips at 90 degrees, you can't possibly have a normal lumbar lordosis. So the
Hmm.
first and most critical thing is that your knees be lower than your hips. How much lower is kind of up to you, but for sure, at least some lower, because that lets you have a normal expression of the lumbar lordosis that you have when standing. After that, you want your keyboard to be as high as your elbows when your hands are hanging when your elbows are at 90 degrees. And you want your monitor, the top of your monitor, to be about where your eyes are looking when they're looking out at the horizon. And that way, your spine is kept in kind of a neutral position. And the test cases, suppose I was looking for jackals on the savannah, how would I want to be arranged? And looking at the horizon is the way you want to be arranged when jackals are the thing, or rabbits, depending. That's how you want to array your body. And if you do that, most of the problems are solved. Unfortunately, our tech kind of conspires to drag us into postures that are really unhelpful. It's very tough to get people to lift their phone up high enough that they don't so they don't kind of enforce the tech neck kind of posture.
Mm-hmm.
That's a conversation for another time. But if you're lucky enough to have a desktop monitor, just put the top of the monitor where you would be looking if you were looking at the horizon, and all of your posture will fall into shape, fall into a normal anatomic alignment as long as your knees are lower than your hips. And if you can make the surface that you're sitting on a little active, like an active sort of chair, then your core will constantly be firing and these are big postural muscles, the internal, external blank, the transversalis, they're big muscles. So they don't have to create big movement to burn a lot of glucose and drive up your metabolic rate.
So with these, the Era 2.0, I guess kind of talk to us also like you also created a for one for adults because this is up to like 300 pounds, I think,
Uh-huh.
for the heavier set people. And then of course you have the button on, which is meant for kids because kids, of course, I have two kids, so I understand the importance of starting young, and that's where,
Right.
especially
No,
getting them
we
into
we
barefoot
stole
shoes. Yeah.
we stole that idea from Apple. You know, if you get kids started on Apple computers early, they'll be using them for the rest of their lives. So we thought, if you can get kids expecting chairs to move when they're young, they'll demand active chairs when they get older. It's a long play. I'll be long dead by the time that works out. But I do think it's important to let kids move while they're sitting. You just watch a kid try and sit on a normal chair, and they're all over the place trying to get it to move.
Yeah.
So, let give them some help for crying out loud. So we invented a chair that's made out of plywood just for kids. We give that design away so that anybody with, a roll saw and a screwdriver can build one. And it has its own website, buttonchairs.org, that plans have been downloaded over 4,000 times.
So what was that idea coming from? Just like you're saying, starting the young generations to get into this right type of chair, I guess, because like I can see my youngest. Yeah, my youngest is the one that's
Idea
always
was to Our idea was to democratize chairs. Schools don't have the money to buy glitter for their preschoolers. So, rather than, making them pay $100 for every chair for every kid, we thought we'll just give them a design. And if they have access to a CNC router, they can just stamp out our button chairs like Christmas cookies.
okay. So what are some of the topics that you're going to be talking about for the upcoming expo that you could kind of share with us briefly?
Oh, well, I'm just gonna, I think, kind of give sort of an academic talk. I'm not sure about just exactly how we got to where we are with the idea that chairs and should be should require a 90-90-90 posture, and then a little anatomy about why that's an unreasonable ask, and then a quick look at different solutions that have been proposed. Standing desks, the yoga ball, the Balin's kneeling chair, and the treadmill desk. There are a lot of solutions that have been floated in the marketplace. None have really taken off, probably for the good reason that the market decides. And I think the market has, wisely said that, yoga balls aren't really the answer. And so my plan is to kind of go through that evolution of how I got to where I think active sitting is probably a good solution for most people. But the market's going to decide, and we're going to find out.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess follow up question: what are some contraindications of people who should not be on active sitting chairs? Is
Yeah,
there?
no, for a while I thought, well, maybe you don't want old people on an active chair because, they have osteoporosis and this and that. And then two very nice old women from a local retirement community, they're well into their 80s, more or less pushed me up against a wall and demanded, because they were both physical therapists and that they knew that they needed it. And so, they convinced me that the age criteria wasn't really appropriate. We do find that, people with Meniere's disease or intrinsic balance problems sit down on our chair and say, I don't think it's for me. And I just immediately agree with them, because I think people have very good instincts about these things. When we've taken our chairs down to the walking street in Burlington and just tried them out on passersby, an easy 80% of people immediately get it and say, "Oh boy, this is supposed to make my posture better, isn't it?" Kind of thing. And about 10% saying, "This is not for me." And another 10% say, "What are you talking about?" so, so it's a spectrum, but it's an interesting spectrum.
So I guess looking towards the future now, what are you guys doing at Core 360 to try to build a brand awareness and just like getting more people into thinking how active sitting is going to help people
Right.
from low back pain, I should say, non-specific low back pain.
Yeah, every business book will tell you, do not invent a new thing for which the market doesn't exist, because you do not have enough money to create a market, no matter how much money you have. You, you just, and so it's a heavy lift. What we found is that earned media, we got a piece in the Wall Street Journal. I did a TED talk. National Public Radio's Here and Now did a segment on our chair project. And we find that that's the way to kind of get awareness out into the world because you can't, no one has enough money to create a market. But what you can do is you can discuss a topic that people are interested in. And because everybody has to sit,
Hmm.
it's a topic that there's a lot of interest. So that's kind of where we spend our time and energy is, writing blogs and talking to newspapers and bloggers like you and podcasters like yourself.
Yeah, the more and more I'm getting into podcasts and of course get into like the barefoot shoes scene and whatnot, it just makes more sense of how everything to me stems from the ground up. You could fix a lot if you were to look at the feet. So started with the fascia, and then of course I got into barefoot shoes, and then now I'm like, well, it totally makes sense to merge these two worlds, and then natural movement kind of came like along the way as far as like how to naturally move, and so that's why I'm always intrigued, and I'm promoting this because I think everyone should learn about different alternative ways. If it's not working for them and they've been doing it for so many years, they should look at different alternatives like what I'm doing right now. So love to see how you could also showcase what other things are coming up, some sneak peeks that's coming up for the Core 360.
Well, as I say, this is our current focus is trying to create a surface that'll keep the foot engaged and interested. And what other things are we working on? That's like soaking up most of our bandwidth right now. We're a small company, but this is, and it takes this is a 3D print, so it takes a bit of a leap to get from 3D printing to injection molding and pressure molding. So that's going to keep us busy for a little while. And doing podcasts with people like yourself, trying to get the word out about active sitting. Because one thing I've discovered is it doesn't matter if you create a solution if nobody knows about it. I kind of thought, okay, we've designed a chair that will solve the problem. Right? Not right. It's not right until you can get it under. It's not right until somebody sits down on one of Herman Miller's chairs and says, hey, what's wrong with this thing? It doesn't move. That's what we're going for. We want active sitting to become the standard. That's the goal.
Well, Dr. Turner, definitely my last question for you now is if someone wants to take away anything from our conversation from today, what are some few things that they can implement starting today?
Well, for sure, take your chair and get your knees lower than your hips and sit at the front edge of the chair. That'll let you have a normal spinal posture and get you a long way to, a better seated life. And then sit less. Uh, you know, sit as little as possible and break up your sitting with little walks. That'll help with the biochemistry catastrophe of sitting slumped all day. These are big asks because getting up from what you're doing is an interruption that it's a problem. So that's where active sitting comes in. We can keep you moving while you don't have to actually change the way you relate to your work environment. So it's low hanging fruit if you can change somebody's chair, but you can certainly change the way you sit on a chair. You can change the height of the chair, get it up high enough, and you can sit for shorter periods and sit less altogether. Those would be as an epidemiologist, that's what I'd say. As an entrepreneur, I'd say, and buy one of our chairs. It'll change everything for
Yes, love that. Those are two great senses. So, how can my followers and audience find you to learn more about Core 360? So, if you want to share that website, great place to purchase the products, as well as an email, and then any like social that you guys have, social media handles. Feel free to share with us.
Well, our website is QOR360.com, and I write a blog. There's like, I don't know, 100,000 words of blog over the last 10 years, if anybody can stand it. Wrote a book about sitting that you can download the PDF from our website for free. You can buy it on Amazon, but you can download it for free. And if you wanted to buy one of our chairs, you can buy it on our website. We box them up here in Morrisville, Vermont, at our warehouse, and we ship next day, and we can get it anywhere in the United States within 3 or 4 days. And actually, we've shipped chairs to 54 different countries around the world. It's amazing. People in Australia are willing to pay $125 worth of postage to get one of our chairs. What's with those weirdos? Yeah, well, they don't have any other alternatives in Australia, I guess.
Yeah. So, and like I said, I know for you guys, it's really the word of mouth, right? Of people really talking about the chairs and how that's how it's grown for you guys. So, I will continue to, do myself and sharing the word about how this can be very effective for people, especially sitting in a chair. So thank you, Dr. Turner, for hopping onto the podcast, sharing your
No,
experience, and I'm looking for yeah,
it's been great. Thanks.
yes,
My
and I'm
wife
looking
thanks you too, because now we can talk about something else tonight at dinner.
well, I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in May. Best of luck, sir.
Okay. Well, we'll see you in May.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Bye bye now.